So, welcome everyone. I can't remember how many sessions we've had, but I'm really excited kind of for this one. And imagination is not a word that's like often associated with policy or strategy. You normally have kind of far more masculine words and sessions where policy and strategy is involved, which is why I'm even more kind of delighted that we've got this session today, because if there's anything that like we need more, it's imagination. Actually, it's been imagination that's really driven like change, like social change and policy change as well. But I'm not gonna steal Cassie's thunder. I'm really delighted to have Cassie here to kind of today. We've been connecting for a few years in kind of Cassie's different guises, working and kind of weaving her way in connections between different sectors, different walks of life, and kind of different backgrounds, and looking at kind of the sweet spots for innovation and creativity in between those spaces. And she now kind of wears at least one hat amongst many, which is Deputy Director for Funding Strategy at the National Lottery Fund. And so I'm really pleased to kind of welcome you here today, Cassie. And before I kind of speak anymore, over to you.
Thanks, Noel. When you just said it's just been a few years, I think, Noel, I probably met you about 12 years ago. It's nice to see quite a lot of people I know on this call, which actually in some ways always makes it worse. And I'm going to embarrass her, but there's a Sophia Parker in the room, and is that my friend Sophia Parker? Because I kind of need to know if you're here. I don't know if it's her. Anyway, Sophia?
It is Cassie.
You're so naughty appearing in things like this. Anyway, thanks for having me. Also, I should say, anyone that follows me on Twitter might know I did my first strengths training yesterday, and I literally can't move. So I'm really struggling. So thank you for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at the National Lottery Community Fund around imagination. And there's also a couple of people here like Sian who are recipients of grants from the programme. And I'm going to share, I guess, a few of the slides from the projects as well, to try and bring it to life a bit. But obviously they would be much better than I will be at talking about their own work. So I have got some slides. I will share them a second. And also, anyone that's already heard me give a talk about this will know half of this. I've done 5 talks this week. Can you all see that? Yeah? No, you'll have to pick it up.
Can see that.
I can now see nothing in the chat. So, yeah, I'm relying on Noel, your like body expressions to me. So this is a quote that I actually just put in a blog post this week and credited the wrong person. But I don't really probably need to say this to this group, but I found this a really helpful quote, actually, just to land some of this in the lottery. And I guess it's just trying to highlight the idea that, imagination is what we need now if we don't want to kind of repattern existing systems, and if we want to go beyond reform. I'll share these slides as well. And this is some of Jenny Winhall's thinking, but again, I guess during the crisis, there's been so much talk about Build Back Better, the new normal. How do we make the most out of this time, even though there's been so much tragedy? But I feel like a lot of what's happening is just really trying to make the current system better. And if we want to do something that's much more transformative, that's why I think imagination is going to play a key role. It was also really important to us at the fund to pay attention to who was doing all the work in the last year around the new normal, like who's getting to build back better, who's, or not better, differently. It just felt it felt really important to be thinking about, well, who's in this work, and what's our role as the fund in making sure that it's not just the same people and the usual suspects. And so we set up something called the Emerging Futures Fund, which was very intentionally, I would call it using funding to do policy design, like trying to do experimental inquiry type grants, which were not about, solutions, but about questions. And we designed it around these three areas. So one was very much looking at how could we resource, alongside our emergency and responsive reactive funding, of which we were doing a huge amount, how could we also start to resource communities to do community-led foresight and collective imagination, to seed and centre new and different narratives, and also to maybe seed like the sort of kernels of alternative or new systems. So those were the sort of three areas that we were looking at. And that's because it kind of links very much to one of our sort of points in our civil society strategy, which is this, a civil society led by local communities that is equipped and able to anticipate, imagine and shape the future. And that's a new point in our civil society strategy, and very much with this idea of, how our communities like operating further upstream, if you like, so that they're not just always firefighting, responding, picking up the mess, clearing up the mess, and actually are really shaping and anticipating their futures. And when we opened the fund, I also started to think about, well, actually maybe this could be the start of something that's more than just a funding program. Like what if we really do seed some kernels of something that's much more about tomorrow? What does it really mean to think about these grants as the seeds of sort of infrastructure? And I know Farah is also on this call, and she's my fellow infrastructure geek and obsessive. So I guess I've been thinking a lot about infrastructure over the last year anyway, and actually thinking about imagination, the capacity for imagining, as infrastructure started to kind of be on my mind. I'm going to just skip through some of the things that we funded, or just like how I was starting to try and think about them, because I guess in a way they were all experiments. What was really nice about the range of different funding that we did was, for example, these three here, Gentle Radical is actually working on like 5 streets in a tiny neighborhood in Cardiff, and Positive Carrifergus is, it's a small town in Northern Ireland, and Good for Nothing was working with the city of Bath. So we had these different scales of experiment, neighborhood level, city level. We also have got grants that are sort of happening, at a country level. So we've got these 5 grants that are happening in Wales, for example, and trying to think about, well, if we want to create an imagination infrastructure, how do we link these up as initiatives in a nation? And quite a few of them, this is Getaway Girls in Leeds, Leisure and Learning in Hastings, and Grapevine in the West Country. No, not the West Country, near Coventry and Leicester. They're all very place-based, and what was interesting about these is that they actually already had ways into working with the town council or the local planning. So their sort of imagination material had an avenue to sort of go into like spend in local places. And then we've also got some of the grants that kind of really link into like new areas of inquiry, like new ways of living. So there's a whole group of the grants that are really looking at, ownership, land, who owns land, how might we want to live differently, what kind of housing do we need now, what kind of shared assets. So I'm really interested in some of the narratives that these initiatives have been able to seed through the grants as well, or hopefully will be able to seed. They haven't yet. And again, there's a collection of the grants that are more around work and thinking about, well, how has and how does work need to continue to change? What does work look like in this emerging future? And then we also made, we thought a lot about who's getting to do this imagining. So we had some very specific groups, like the Muslim Women's Resource Centre up in Scotland, and the one down on the bottom right hand corner is an organisation called Damask, who works with Syrian refugees. So we really wanted to bring in the collective imagining from many different groups. And then I was really excited about some that I felt were like had the potential to start something entirely new, like the Centre for Knowledge Equity, which has set up an Imaginarium that is lived, learned and practice experience being weaved together to do kind of collective imagination practice. And the Design Council setting up a community design network. So those are kind of some of that just gives you hopefully a bit of a flavour of some of the initiatives that we funded. And then we also, like, what does imagination practice even look like? And I think one of the things that we did try and stipulate with the grants, which caused quite a lot of tension internally, especially at the fund, was bringing together communities with expertise in kind of imagination or foresight practices, because at the fund we tend to talk about, communities know best, and communities know a lot, but there is a rigor and a set of practices that I don't think all communities are equipped with in terms of some of this type of work. So we did try and actively encourage and partner people up with like other organizations that could bring kind of methodologies into the work. And actually, out of the 52 grants that we made across the UK, there is a pretty striking difference between the ones that really did do that and those that didn't, which we can maybe talk a bit more about in the questions. And we also just tried to design other materials around the work as well. Like we got resolved to create a community toolkit that kind of takes people through different activities around collective imagination and storytelling, etc. And I guess this was all starting to think about what else we can start to resource around the actual grants themselves, thinking about this idea of infrastructure. So I'm going to do a slight deep dive into three. So this is probably the one that many of you might already have heard about, because it's actually had some press and has been like hugely powerful in its kind of in its journey. So this was in Barrow, up in the northwest of England, and Barrow is known for many things, and some of them are, it has 40% of children are living in poverty there at the moment. It's being labelled the most unhappiest place in Britain, but it also has loads of amazing creative people living there, like gorgeous countryside around and the sea, and actually is one of the recipients of the government's New Towns Fund, quite a significant amount of money. So they partnered, the local council there partnered up with New Constellations and the author Hilary Cottam, who I'm sure many of you know. And that was a really good example of where there was some like practice expertise, method, like the new constellation was bringing some practices around collective imagining and working alongside the council and the community. And they did a whole series of different engagements with the community. They had like these billboards up where you could phone in with your dreams. They did loads of stuff in the local paper because this was all during COVID, so they had to do all of it online. The team have still never actually been to Barrow, the new Constellations team. But they ended up taking 15 people from the community on a voyage, ranging from some of the people working in the shipyard to the chief constable of the police, to a nail bar technician, like an amazing range of local residents. And through their practice, or that there they are, through their approach, this group, alongside loads of others that contributed during the process, came up with basically a series of like what you might call principles or guides in terms of where they want the future of Barrow to head. It was kind of their collective imagining, their collective dreams for the future of Barrow. And what's been so powerful about this piece of work is that the chief exec of the council has now, those principles, these kind of guides to orient them, have now been actually, I don't know local government speak, so excuse me, but they're sort of in the constitution now. They have actually been agreed across the council that these are going to be the guides, like the guides of Barrow. And they will be used to inform the spend of the Towns Fund. Another initiative is something called the People's Podium by Glimpse, and they've actually been going around and working in about 4 different places. So in Cleveland, in Margate, and I can't remember the other 2, so that's really bad. Anyway, but they sort of were taking a literal podium around that they'd sort of mimicked to look like the podium the government's been using during COVID, but also obviously ended up having to do quite a lot of it online. But they've been, just really trying to give people who wouldn't normally take themselves up onto a podium and to have a voice, but they've also designed it. They've really considered what do you need to give people in advance of doing that, so that it's not just a blank sheet of paper. They've tried to like scaffold the experience to take people into a kind of a different way of thinking about what they want for their futures. So they sent people things in advance. They encourage them to kind of imagine and journal. I guess this one's a bit different because it's not so much, it's less about the collective. It is very much an individuals coming and kind of voicing their futures. But the film that they're going to make at the end of this, because this is still sort of 2/3 of the way through, will weave all of these together. This is just some more. And then the last one I'm going to share is the partnership between Shared Assets and Future Narratives Lab, which has been like thinking about how to create a new and different narrative around land. And yeah, I actually don't know this as well as they do, so I feel like I've just taken their slides and I can't do it justice. But I think this is a really potentially powerful piece of work where they've had the resource to be able to work with a really wide-ranging group of people who do like land-based work, or who've been excluded traditionally from the land, and they have come up with a whole new set of kind of frames and seeds of new narratives, that they can then use to make some content with. I won't go. I think this is them. Those are much more flashy than my slides. So we're sort of 2/3 of the way through that particular funding programme. And I guess as it's been going on, I've been starting to think more about, well, what has been really powerful about doing that, and what more can we do? And thinking about, I think what I've been most struck by is, whilst there's lots of people that are investing in kind of citizen assemblies and the sort of deliberative democracy work that's going on, and there's nothing wrong with that, I really think this work of growing the capacity to imagine is much further upstream than that. It's almost like before you do a citizens assembly, which already tends to be in a defined, it already has its parameters set. I think this is the work that we really need to invest in before we do a lot of the sort of deliberative democracy work. So I'm starting to think about this idea of imagination infrastructuring, with imagination and collective imagination being, that's the soil from which other things grow. It's much further upstream, and there's so many different ways to do that work, like different collective imagination practices. We've just commissioned a piece of work that's actually just going to try and pull together all the practices. So we'll be publishing that at our event in June, which I'm going to come to. But obviously there's so many ways of tapping into like wisdom and intelligence and creativity from all over the place, and obviously like there's a lot of people in the creative and cultural world that have been doing work like this for a very long time, and obviously in Indigenous communities this is often how they've literally guided their lives, but that it's the collective aspect of it that I think is also really important around the imagination practices. And then obviously to me, like, infrastructure means long-term investment in capacity, whether that's literal money, but it's also the scaffolding, the care, and the ongoing investment. And so rather than a local authority doing lots of different consultations or only citizen assemblies, what happens if a local authority actually invests in an ongoing way in some kind of imagination infrastructure or infrastructuring? What would that look like? And that being the spaces, the places, the practices, the relationships, etc. And so we are doing an event on the 10th of June. I'm also doing another event with Farah, but I haven't got a link to share for that one yet. But this one in particular is actually a bit more of an international event. We've got some people coming to speak from different places in the world. And it's also, we did a kind of a pre-meet for this first event with a bunch of other people that are already doing some amazing work in this space, some of whom you'll know. A few of you, I think, are even here. So I guess at the fund, we're really looking at how we can invest in this in an ongoing way. And we are also doing an event with the RSA in June as well, where we're going to be profiling all of the 52 grants, and trying to tell sort of a collective story. I hope that's all right for time. Totally didn't pay attention to time. So that's where we are really. I would say I think I'm still learning about what imagination infrastructuring is. I think the two words together are provocative enough to make people curious, and that in some ways for now that's almost my intent. And because I'm obsessed with infrastructuring, I wanted to just have that as a feature of the work. But in terms of practices, I think, anyway, I'll shut up now, and I'm sure you'll have questions.
That was amazing, Cassie. Like so many different examples from like different communities, different parts of the country, like different issues. And I think, we'd want to deep dive into like each one of those issues to explore kind of like more about them. and I'm sure there are kind of web links where we can kind of get curious and like eavesdrop on the different projects. And there's a few questions in the chat which I'll share. I had a kind of, I wouldn't say a quick question, but and it goes, maybe it's that tension between imagination and what we traditionally see as infrastructuring, which is how do you continue cultivating that spirit of imagination, like to like the next stages and to audiences that you want to be exposed to the work that these communities have done, but with their spirit of curiosity and imagination, rather than to try and package it up either to align to like their own agendas and to, you know, to use it from that, or just to take it as one particular stage in a linear process of work. That makes sense.
So sorry, do you mean, no, like how does it, once you've done some of the initial practices, that it doesn't, like whatever comes out of that doesn't kind of get quashed by the system that you're then trying to like implement it into?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I think that, I do think that, I mean, I think that will happen inevitably in some contexts. I suppose that's why I think the Barrow one is so powerful, because because right from the outset, who was involved really mattered, and like just how much they sort of socialized it as an approach throughout the whole community over sort of months. And also then like literally got it like baked into the kind of constitution of the council. I guess, yeah, that it feels like the idea of a, you know, we've been quite well, like Sian might, I don't know what Sian thinks, but I'm putting her on the spot, but there's definitely been some initiatives that have been we're going to go away and we're going to do some imagining, and then I'm not really sure, you know, and I've tried to be you know, it's difficult, isn't it, as a funder, being aware of your, conscious of your power, so not wanting to be like, well, can you go and do this, or you should do, like, you just can't do that, but can see where opportunity maybe is not going to be realized because some of the design of the approach hasn't maybe been as it could have been. And you know, and that's what I, when I said earlier, there has been such a difference between people that did really take on board this idea, you know, like there are people, and I don't mean this to sound derogatory, that could interpret communities doing collective imagining as like getting some pens and paper and big sheets of, well, I just said paper, pens and big sheets of paper, and going to the village hall and sitting together and like doing some visioning, and like that's not this work, but that's quite a journey to take some communities on. But that's one of the things I'm really excited by and I'm really committed to, is, well, how do we build the capacity of communities, even if for now there is a rigor, there are things that need a different kinds of expertise to be brought in to do. Like, it is a capacity building thing for me, and everyone has imagination, you know.
And I just picking up some of the questions on the kind of on the chat, kind of where do you see the distinction between imagination and kind of and problem solving? What, I guess you kind of picked up a bit on it in kind of comparing it to like other methods, but yeah, it'd be good to find out a bit, because often there's quite a focus, isn't there, on like we need to define a problem to then be able to focus the conversation and then to like really look at how we solve it. So
yeah, I think, and again, like I do feel a bit of a fraud in the sense that it's not like I've studied imagination. There'll be lots of science, and we're going to have some science people come to talk at the conference in June. So I'm sort of making some of this up. So, but I mean, I do have a pretty strong view on how it's different from problem solving, because as we've just said, you know, like I think that's where Jenny Winhall's work is really powerful, is so much of design tends to do the problem solving before the kind of inquiry, the working upstream, the kind of, you know, for me, the imagination is more wild, it's more creative, it's really going into the unknown territory. It's like you have no idea really even what the territory is yet. You're discovering that, and then I think you might go, the problem solving, the sort of more traditional design-led approaches come next. And in some ways, maybe that's helping me think. Maybe that's another reason why the infrastructuring is important here, because it's that idea of like, well, I suppose in design you might talk about continuous improvement, but even that's a good example. So continuous improvement, which happens a lot in digital service design, we continually improve our grant making processes, for example, but that can often end up just keeping things relatively the same. You know, you're making things better, but you're not doing anything transformative. And that for me is it's the leaps that we need to make that I think are the difference between imagination and like problem solving around design.
So there's some amazing different questions. I'm gonna zoom in on infrastructuring. There's a couple of questions around infrastructuring in terms of like what it means for you, and also like what are, you know, kind of good things to read or watch for people who want to become obsessed with infrastructuring. You don't get too many sessions where people want to become obsessed with infrastructuring, but clearly there's a strong community of infrastructure obsessives here, of which I also hold my hands up and say I'm one as well. Oh, someone's putting a oh, I'm just gonna
no, it's muted you all.
I'm sorry. I'm just gonna,
it's just like
sorry, Heidi. Do you want to share that? Hopefully you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. For some reason, I can't access the chat at all. I'm so sorry, but sorry, I'm one of those infrastructure geeks, and so one of the books I'm holding up is Extra Statecraft: The Power of Infrastructure Space by Keller Easterling. That's Easterling. Extra Statecraft.
Extra straight.
Isabella's just posted it in the chat. So
thanks, Isabella.
And I've got a whole bunch of I'm about to publish a blog to introduce this event on the 10th of June, and in that we've done a whole lot of research on this area, but there are a couple of quite recent papers around infrastructuring that I've found really inspiring. Yeah.
Cool. And there's a question by Sarah, which I guess links to infrastructuring in a way, in terms of like, what's your thinking about scale in relation to relationship to that? Sarah, if you want to kind of jump in and like speak to that kind of question, go ahead.
Sure, thanks, Noel. Cassie, it's such beautiful, inspiring work, and it's wonderful to hear more about it. And one of the questions that I had was about, you've already touched on some of it, to be honest, is you're thinking about scale over time and routes to scale. And I really noted at the beginning, you're thinking about, this is not about improving existing systems, this is about new systems. And yet some of the routes to scale that I think you're beginning to discuss in there are also about how do we infect some of those existing systems and get them to act differently. So I'm just curious about, probably not the route to scale that you see, but some of the routes to scale that you can imagine and are encouraging, supporting people to take.
Hi, Sarah. Nice to see you. So, I mean, this is just in terms of my work and the context in which I'm working, where I currently see it is probably 3 areas. There might be more. So the first is actually, I'm probably at the moment particularly trying to see how we can get more of the government's funding, for example. So there's all kinds of funds coming up, isn't there? The Levelling Up Fund, the Community Wealth Fund, some more rounds of the Towns Fund. And actually, and like, you know, they're working with, they've got a whole bunch of suppliers. Some of you might be there, might don't, you know, Future Gov are one, And I've just recently been meeting with some of those teams in government and using the Barrow one as an example. And actually, you know, even just seeing whether those funds could include this at the outset of that work, that might make a difference. I don't know, but I'd love to see if we can do that. I think the second thing is, I'm also like interested in the public. It is gambling money, but the lottery two fingers are in every corner shop. So there's something for me about the public consciousness that an organisation like the lottery has, and we're about to announce a partnership with a big corporate who is also very much in the public consciousness. So and I've started some conversations with people like Timpson's. So actually, if you have this kind of work, and I don't know if you saw, but I've already tried to get in touch with them through a friend, but there's an article in Vogue just now by Cara Delevingne. She's a supermodel. I don't know that world anymore, but she's actually starting a whole new charity around imagination. So I suppose I'm looking at, I'm really interested in mainstream. It's one of the reasons I wanted to work at the lottery for a while, is that very mainstream public consciousness. A couple of the grants were intentionally given to organisations that have roots into I'm hoping the Sun is actually going to feature some of the work. So that alone as well is potentially I don't know if it's scale, but it's the public consciousness. And then I guess lastly, it's the I've been trying to get other funders on board with this. And how do we keep linking things up? So that the whole, I can't remember who said it, but the small parts loosely joined, or that beautiful quote of the islands. You'll know the ones I mean, but that's where the infrastructure comes in. So what's our role as funders with other funders to kind of resource how these things connect up and tell a bigger narrative, and do so in an ongoing way. Those are probably the three things. I don't think any of those are going to be straightforward or easy. I'm just saying that they're some of my aspirations for this work, but it might not happen.
Looking up the questions, I don't know, Sophia, if you wanted to come in on your question around relationship between imagination and stress, which is it's so important, but even more so now, like during this really strange situation.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a point I think others have also made in the chat, but it's really just thinking about what are the conditions that are needed for our imaginations to flourish. We all have imagination, but circumstances can get in the way. And I've got a very personal experience of that. As someone who has been running a very, very full-on frontline charity for 5 years, I'm 2 months out of that, and realizing what gets unleashed with a proper rest, and realizing how hard it is to have that sense of imagination, that very expansionary thinking of kind of what if sense if you're very busy. I also see it in the work, when we were supporting families who are really struggling to stay afloat. Actually, when you're worrying about getting another meal on the table, it's very hard to think beyond that. So I suppose I think this is very much in Cassie's work, but I guess it's a general reflection for those of us thinking about imagination, that actually really saying what are the conditions we're creating to enable people's imaginations to flourish is really important. It can't be a kind of privileged activity that is reserved for people who have the time and lack of stress. So.
Hi. And actually, I've just looked at the chat and there's loads of other people I know too, so that's funny. Anyway, but that is really important, and I think I'm just going to put in the chat. There's a video to the panel that we did at the Skull World Forum a couple of weeks ago, and I think Rabab from Gentle Radical and Fazana Khan from Healing Justice London, who's also part of the Centre for Knowledge Equity grant, I think they talk about that really beautifully, about the spaces they've been able to create for this. Even just, you know, like people whose bodies have never belonged in other people's imaginations and what that means. And so it's a 50-minute talk, but it's actually one of the most beautiful conversations I've ever been in. I'm not really in it. It's 4 of the grantees, and I would just really recommend listening to that. And they talk about that a lot. And I might pick on Farah because I think Farah will also have something to say about this, if she's still here.
I don't know that I have anything. I mean, I think you guys have already kind of covered a lot of it. It's actually just something that Mama D, who's one of our Civic Futures leader, was talking about this morning. Cassie, as you said, I'm a fellow infrastructure enthusiast, and kind of thinking about our role at the GLA, I often think about what scaffolding we can create within the city to support growth, and think about like trellises and how trellises support growth but don't confine it, and things grow as they need to with this kind of supportive structure. But then in the conversation, someone was also saying, you know, if the soil conditions aren't right, if there's not sunshine, if something isn't watered, a trellis by itself won't kind of be sufficient. So thinking about, you know, I think the work of creating infrastructure to support this work is so necessary alongside, but then, and it's that kind of counterbalanced with kind of addressing the structural inequalities that exist that are also that prevent people from creating their own trellises. So it's a bit slightly chicken and egg, I guess, because also the imagination is required in order for us to know how to kind of dismantle the system, but the system also prevents us from having space to have that imagination. So kind of it's but thanks for sharing. It's lovely to hear about your work verbally in addition to reading your blogs.
I always think everyone has read all this already. Yeah. Any other? Oh no, I'm taking over. It's your thing.
No. I was trying to make this as a conversation as much as possible. This was.
Can I jump in then? Because I suppose I have to say, like, I have literally given not this exact. I have now talked about this, you know, quite a few times, and that's fine, and I am really excited about the potential of this work, but I do feel like I don't really know what to do with some of it. So, you know, I would love if people here in this group have ideas about what else someone like the National Lottery Community Fund should be doing, other partners we should be speaking to, like how. Yeah, I would really welcome, like, there's a lot of amazing people in this group. I'm like, help. Like, what else should we be doing or thinking about?
That's a great call to action, Cassie, and you know, people do jump in the kind of in the chat, or if you want to suggest any ideas, and I can share Cassie's contact details as well. And I definitely kind of recommend looking at Cassie's blog, but I'm not saying this to conclude the session, just so that I didn't forget to say this. I was thinking about infrastructure, Cassie, and we talked about social infrastructure, but how about physical infrastructure? I mean, even if you're not funding explicitly physical infrastructure, are there kind of examples you've seen either through the stuff that you funded or kind of elsewhere where actually the way that physical infrastructure has been designed actually kind of like captures people's imagination in the kind of the most like basic or kind of like sophisticated ways. I'm not thinking about people like leaving pop art sculptures like per se, but you know, it could be that, I don't know, the way an alley is designed or the way like a high street is designed. I don't know if you'd seen any examples of that.
That's a really good question. I'm sure there will. I mean, there's so many amazing people that do like placemaking design. I'd be really surprised if Katri was on the call, which is not. I would ask her. But I haven't personally come across anyone specifically talking about physical infrastructure that can facilitate collective imagination. I think that that's one of the reasons, though, as well, why I started talking about it as infrastructure, because I was thinking about what's the physical infrastructure that we have for deliberative, like the town halls, so whether it's actually just how do those existing physical spaces, if and when we go back to them, not like how do we consider them as spaces for collective imagination, not just like democratic things. But I guess as well, given given all the stuff that's going on at the moment as well around the high, there's going to be so much renewal happening in places that is going to be physical. I guess that is a real opportunity to be trying to influence. Think about what's the design of like the very hard infrastructure on a high street or something.
Definitely. I'm trying to see if there's one. So I'm now asking two questions in a row. So I'm being selfish, but this came out kind of yesterday around. So in Newham we've got we've got like a permanent citizens assembly now, but we've also got kind of a youth citizens assembly, and kind of the youth citizens assembly. It's interesting, some of the issues that come out, some of them are similar to like what the adults say in kind of deliberative environments, but some of them are like really different. And I imagine that may play out also in terms of the ways people use imagination to be able to like bring together like other communities. And so is there something about given that we're creating a world that young people are going to inherit and going to live the majority of their kind of lives in, like what, and this might, this is a question for Cassie and for everyone like here, but be really great to get any examples of where like young people have kind of led the way, or like been supported to really activate like their own imagination for like the wider community, not just like for their own age group.
I mean, so young people is a really big focus for us at the fund. It was anyway. We have a whole group that are called Young People in the Lead, which is a group of young people that help influence and think about our grant making and our funding strategy, etc. But we are we're starting to think about and design with the Jubilee, which we have to do something around. How can we use that? What's the work we could do in the run up to that, specifically with young people, that's around collective imagination and present and future generations? So that's kind of the frame. And again, thinking about what are the brands? I'm definitely not up on like what are the cool brands with young people, so I'm trying to start to like work out who should we partner with, what would that's definitely a thing that would be an at scale thing. A couple of the two other things really. The Getaway Girls are 16 to 19-year-old young women, so they are like a couple of the, and then another one in Wales, they were young women that were sort of leading the work, but also with our Young People in the Leads network, we're actually we've linked them up with the School of International Futures, and we're kind of trying to see like, can we equip them to be like foresight practitioners? They're very, they're young, they're in their like late teens, they're not in their 20s. So we're also experimenting with what does it mean to build capacity in younger people they can already imagine, but to know what more to do with that, and to actually do strategic foresight as well.
Cool. And I'll bring Jenny in, and then we can kind of conclude. Jenny, do share your example.
Yeah, it's something that we started pre-lockdown, and then it's been hard to get young people together since then physically, so we've been trying to do it remotely. It doesn't really work. It's much better if everyone's together. But we did this in Manchester, and we got young people to use foresight tools, and we also got them to do causal layered analysis, and what it led to was sort of, instead of talking about youth violence, it was a youth violence piece of work around stop and search, chicken boxes, all of the stuff that's at the event level. Young people sort of identified that it was all about kind of trust and respect and love and hope. And that's meant that those outcomes are now feeding into the commissioning framework for those issues in Manchester. And we've also got them to do a 3 Horizons, but with professionals. And the really interesting thing, picking up on what you said, Noel, is everyone who works with young people was completely unsurprised by what young people said, but the professionals were surprised. And so that's led into a discussion about why are professionals so terrible at listening, and how can we bridge a gap. It's like an intergenerational dialogue, really, because I think that's really important. People identify different things. So yeah, we managed to do that. We haven't been able to do more with young people together because of lockdown, but this was pre-lockdown and it's feeding through now into commissioning.
Cool. That's such a great example, and we're almost to time, so we're going to have to conclude it there. But Cassie, I don't know, before we kind of say a big kind of thank you to you, I don't know whether you had any final reflections or call outs like you wanted to make, like for your event.
I'm just finding my little Eventbrite link. Please come to this. We'll start to announce speakers soon. And yeah, and like we like I said, we had a little sort of meet up of maybe 15 organisations that are already doing some of this work, and we want to grow that. So if there's people here that kind of are already doing this sort of work, or want to, then I will share my email. I mean, I'm sure lots of people know where to find me anyway, but I'm trying to so we could all meet more as a group rather than like lots. Yeah, as in I can let you know when we're going to next come together as this group. And yeah, and if any of you have got challenges for me or idea, I mean, I feel like even like Sophia's question, I don't know, I don't think I've answered that very well, and I think that is an ongoing inquiry. But I think, yeah, I always want to hear like challenge or ideas, so please send them to me or get in touch.
Great. Well, let's if we can all, I know we're not all in the same room, but like if we can all maybe like unmute and maybe give a big round of applause to Cassie. Thanks, Cassie. That was like an amazing whirlwind, and we'll share the recording of this, the slides, and also do kind of share that Eventbrite link as well. Next week we've got Antonia Jenkins from Centre for Local Economic Strategies that's going to talk about how to take a community wealth building approach. In other words, how to get your local businesses, your employers, your developers to really be able to put their resources and assets back into the community. Thanks everyone for joining. There were some really great ideas and streams of kind of themes that could have been events and sessions in their own right. So if you want to suggest kind of a theme, an organisation, or a speaker, or if you'd like to share kind of work that you're doing, then do get in touch. Otherwise, have a good afternoon, and thanks again, Cassie.
No, thanks, Noel. And really quickly, can you save the Teams chat?
We'll do.
Great, because there's loads in there, isn't there? So
there's loads of stuff in there, so I'll make sure I capture it.
Thanks for having me.